I never thought I'd be sitting across a mahogany desk from my own mother, watching her lawyer hand me a thick stack of legal documents while she refused to even look me in the eye. All because my grandmother decided to leave her $6.8 million estate to me instead of her. It's one thing to mourn the loss of the woman who raised me, but it's an entirely different nightmare to have your own flesh and blood try to ruin your life out of pure, unadulterated greed. My mother is currently suing me for every penny, claiming I manipulated a dying woman. But what she doesn't know is that I have a recording that will not only destroy her case, but will likely change how everyone in our family sees her forever. Was I wrong to stay silent about the video until the very last second? Or would you have let her dig her own grave just like I did? I really need you to listen to the whole story before you judge me, because this isn't just about money. It's about 20 years of secrets, lies, and a betrayal that goes deeper than I ever imagined possible. To understand why my grandmother, Alina, left everything to me, you have to understand the dynamic of our family, or rather, the lack of one. My mother, Diane, was Alina's only child, and by all accounts, she was spoiled rotten from the day she was born. My grandfather made a fortune in commercial real estate, and when he passed away 20 years ago, he left everything in a trust that Alina controlled. Diane expected to live a life of leisure on that inheritance, but Alina was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who believed in hard work and character. She saw early on that Diane was more interested in country clubs and designer bags than in actually building a life or being a mother. When I was born, Diane treated me more like an accessory than a son. When the novelty of having a child wore off, I was basically dropped off at my grandmother's house every weekend, which eventually turned into me living there full-time by the age of 10. Alina was the one who checked my homework, the one who took me to the doctor, and the one who taught me how to manage money and respect people regardless of their status. Diane, meanwhile, was always traveling or finding herself, usually on an allowance Alina provided just to keep her out of trouble. As the years went by, the rift between my mother and grandmother grew. Diane would only show up when she needed her credit card debt cleared or when she wanted a down payment for a new house she couldn't afford to maintain. I watched my grandmother's face fall every time the phone rang, and it was Diane asking for money instead of asking how she was doing. About 5 years ago, Alina's health started to decline. It started with forgetfulness, then progressed into a serious heart condition. I moved back into her estate to be her primary caregiver, balancing my job with nursing her through her final years. I was the one holding her hand during the scary hospital stays and the one making sure she had her favorite tea every morning. Diane. She visited maybe once every 3 months, usually complaining about the depressing atmosphere of a sick room and subtly asking Alina if she had updated her affairs lately. It was disgusting to witness. Alina wasn't blind. She knew exactly what her daughter was waiting for. She knew Diane was just counting down the days until she could sell the estate and move to the coast. 6 months ago, Alina passed away peacefully in her sleep. I was heartbroken. She was my world. But the grief was quickly interrupted by Diane's arrival at the house. She didn't even wait for the funeral to start looking through Alina's jewelry box. When the day of the will reading came, Diane walked into the attorney's office wearing a black veil like she was a grieving widow in a movie, acting all distraught. But when the lawyer announced that Alina had left the $6.2 million in investments, the $600,000 property, and all personal effects entirely to me, Diane's grief vanished in a second. She turned bright red, stood up, and screamed that I must have drugged my grandmother or coerced her into signing a new will. She called me a thieving brat and vowed to take me to court to reclaim what was rightfully hers. That was the start of a legal battle that has dragged on for months, costing thousands in legal fees and turning our entire extended family against me. Diane told everyone I was a master manipulator who isolated Alina in her final days to steal the fortune. So that's where things stood, my own mother painting me as a villain to anyone who would listen, all while she lived in a rented apartment she couldn't afford, waiting for a payday. She filed a formal lawsuit to contest the will on the grounds of undue influence and diminished mental capacity. I was being dragged through the mud, and my lawyer was worried because Diane had found a disgruntled former maid to lie and say I used to scream at Alina to change the will. It was a complete fabrication, but it was gaining traction in court. I was at my breaking point, facing the possibility of losing the legacy Alina wanted me to have, simply because my mother was a better liar. I had to make a choice. Do I try to settle and give her half just to make her go away, or do I use the one piece of evidence I've been holding on to, something so damaging it would destroy her reputation forever? Before I tell you about the video and the final confrontation in the courtroom, I want you to pause and think about this. If your own mother was suing you for millions based on a lie, would you try to settle for the sake of peace, or would you go for the jugular to protect the truth? Drop a comment below and tell me what you would do in my shoes. The day of the final evidentiary hearing arrived, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Deanne was sitting at the plaintiff's table, looking smug. She had her witnesses lined up, and her lawyer was ready to give a closing argument about how I had brainwashed a frail old woman. My lawyer looked at me and whispered, "If you have anything else, now is the time." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. See, a month before Alina died, she knew Diane was going to cause trouble. She wasn't just sharp, she was prophetic. One afternoon, when she was feeling particularly strong, she asked me to set up her iPad on the nightstand. She told me she wanted to record a message for the future. I thought it was just a final goodbye, but it was so much more than that. I stood up and asked the judge for permission to present a piece of digital evidence that had not yet been entered into the record. Diane's lawyer objected, but because it was directly relevant to the claim of undue influence, the judge allowed it. The video started playing on the large monitor in the courtroom. It was Alina, looking frail, but her eyes were as clear as diamonds. In the video, she says, "Diane, I know you're watching this in a courtroom because you couldn't wait for me to die so you could spend money you didn't earn. You're probably telling a judge that my grandson forced me to change my will. The truth is, I changed it because of what happened on the night of October 14th. The courtroom went silent. Diane turned ghost-white. The video continued with Alina explaining that on that night, Diane had come over while she thought I was out running errands. Diane didn't know Alina had a hidden nanny cam in her clock, something she'd installed years ago for security. The video then cut to the security footage from that night. It showed Diane standing over Alina's bed, shouting at her for not giving her an early inheritance advancement. Diane was seen shaking her mother's shoulder, mocking her illness, and literally saying, "Just die already, you old bat, so I can finally live my life. If you don't leave me everything, I'll make sure your precious grandson ends up in jail for elder abuse. I'll tell everyone he's the one hurting you." The entire courtroom gasped. The judge looked horrified. In the video, Alina's voice came back on, saying, "I kept this video as insurance for my grandson. I loved you, Diane, but you are a parasite. I am of sound mind, and I am choosing to leave you nothing because you have already stolen enough of my peace." When the screen went black, you could have heard a pin drop. Diane didn't even try to argue. She didn't look at her lawyer. She just grabbed her purse and ran out of the courtroom, sobbing, not out of guilt, but because she knew the game was over. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice immediately, ordering Diane to pay all of my legal fees. But the aftermath was even more intense. Once the family saw the footage, Diane was completely ostracized. No one would take her calls. She lost her social standing. Her friends at the club dropped her, and she ended up having to move into a tiny studio apartment and actually get a job for the first time in her life. I used a portion of the inheritance to set up a foundation in Alina's name for elder care and advocacy, making sure no one else has to go through the intimidation she faced. I haven't spoken to my mother since that day in court. She sent a few emails lately, claiming she changed and asking for a small loan to help with her mounting debts, but I don't even reply. People ask me if I feel guilty for leaving my mother with nothing, but I remember the look in Alina's eyes in that video, the fear and the sadness, and my guilt disappears. I protected the legacy of the woman who actually raised me, and I think that's exactly what Alina wanted. This whole experience taught me that blood doesn't make you family. Respect, love, and loyalty do. My mother chose money over her own mother and her own son, and in the end, she lost both. It's a heavy burden to carry, knowing your family is broken beyond repair, but I sleep better at night knowing I stood my ground and didn't let a bully win. If you think I did the right thing by using that video to stop my mother, or if you think I should have tried to forgive her despite the abuse, Let me know in the comments. This was a long, painful journey, but I'm finally starting to find some peace. Please like this video if you were on my side and think Deanne got exactly what she deserved for her greed. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this where the truth finally comes to light. And don't forget to share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'll be reading through them to see what you all think. I'll see you all in the next story.